Come on!
Yo, ladies and gentlemen, boys and beautiful girls out there in a galaxy far, far away. I'm doing this a little bit differently today because my camera seems to have stopped working. I cannot get it to turn on, so I'm doing it this way. There are still visuals, but it's more of a podcast experience. So, The Last Jedi, it's out. I saw it. In fact, I've already seen it twice. Now, I'll tell you very quickly that the first time I saw this movie, I had a great time. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I saw it in the Leicester Square Odeon. It was a great crowd, and I didn't know anything about any reviews. I stayed away from all reactions and all responses, and I had something of a euphoric buzz because I thought this actually feels to me like a Star Wars movie. Now, before anybody jumps in and starts berating me, etc., you may or may not know that when The Force Awakens came out, I did a review of that film on my previous channel where I absolutely tore it apart and slated it. Nowadays, everybody seems to say that The Force Awakens was a disappointment. They didn't like it that much. It wasn't as good as they thought it was. However, when I first posted my review, I seemed to be one of the only people saying it was dreadful, and everyone else was saying that it's wonderful. So if you want, you can see that review. I'll put a link to it below. But the point is when I saw this one, I thought, oh my god, it feels like writer-director Rian Johnson feels the same way about episode 7 as I did, because this movie, The Last Jedi, has so many fuck you moments essentially to the previous story, the previous film in the saga. It's literally from the word go. As soon as Luke throws that lightsaber away, it's like, fuck you, Force Awakens. As soon as you get Snoke saying to Kylo Ren, you lost to a girl who hasn't even been trained with a lightsaber, it was literally like Rian Johnson saying, who the hell wrote the previous script? This is terrible, this doesn't make any sense. And there were so many moments in the film where I literally thought it's very obvious that Rian Johnson has quite a negative disposition when it comes to the previous movie. And that being said, because I felt like he had an enormous uphill struggle to try and create a new coherent story, he literally had to essentially wrestle a train that is on the wrong tracks and get it off of the wrong tracks and put it onto new tracks and then tell his own story and make it work. So that being said, the film was never going to be completely and totally flawless, because it's very, very difficult to redirect everything to the way he wants it to be. But I will say that ultimately, I genuinely felt like he did it, even down to the fact that ever since Star Wars Episode 1 came out, there was this big bullshit story that began, which is that the Force is something based upon metachlorians, that you are either born with the Force or you are not. And Luke and Anakin and all of these people in the bloodline are evidently born with a high metachlorian count, which means they can be Jedis, and everyone else, if they aren't born with it, then they're not Jedis. And this theme has been thrown around all the way to the idea that Rey might be Luke's daughter, and so she's probably got the Force and all this crap, and I hated that, and thousands or millions of people hated it, because it was like, well, that's not Star Wars, is it? The whole point of the Force is the idea that it exists, it is everywhere, and everybody has the potential to tap into it. But all of that was changed, and I hated this idea of it being a royal family bloodline thing. And again, Rian Johnson has successfully, in my opinion, gotten it back to what it's supposed to be. Now, there are things that people may not like. For example, the idea that Rey is not Luke's daughter. Rey is nobody, right? But for me, I'm like, no, that's perfect. She shouldn't be anybody, because it allows the Force to be what it's supposed to be. Anybody can tap into it as long as they essentially pay attention or work to become a Jedi Knight. Essentially, anybody can become one, that's what Star Wars is supposed to be. Now, not everybody is going to look at the film in this particular way. Most people watch the film in a kind of just entertainment, or let me look at it as if this is real and these are real people and real characters with a real story. And look, it's not real, it's just one person, the writer-director's interpretation of the story. That's what you are watching. And what I felt in the movie is that the writer-director, Rian Johnson, is very passionate about Star Wars, very passionate about filmmaking. His cinematography is absolutely amazing, has been since his first black and white short film, Demon Golf Ball from Hell. The first time I saw his movie Brick about 6 years ago, which was the first film of his I saw, I thought, oh my God, within the first moment, there's a shot right at the beginning of the camera scrolling down a set of lockers in a school, and I thought, oh my God, this is actually a real director. This is a guy who knows how to use a camera, who tells the story with a camera. And so this continued on to his next film, Looper, which is not perfect script-wise, but I can still feel the heart and the passion and the control that he had. So when he got this Star Wars, I was excited because I genuinely feel like he's one of the only real directors in the business. Now, when it comes to his approach to making this movie, I feel like the whole thing hinges on a single line, which is towards the end of the film when Finn is about to sacrifice himself to blow up this beam of light, which is pointing at the resistance, the last few rays of light, let's say, in the universe. He's going to blow himself up, and then Rose, the kind of Japanese manga character type of girl, she crashes into Finn intentionally to save him, and she says to him, "We will not win this by fighting what we hate, but by saving what we love." And I felt 100% positive when she said that line, that was Rian Johnson's approach to making this movie. Rian Johnson was like, I hate the prequels, I hate The Force Awakens, I'm not allowed to tell everyone that I hate it because I'm employed by Disney, J.J. Abrams is my friend, but I really fucking hate it, but I cannot save Star Wars by fighting against everything I hate. I can only save Star Wars by saving what I love about Star Wars. And I felt like that's exactly how the movie felt. There are big fuck you moments to The Force Awakens, but for the most part, he saved what he loved about the original trilogy. He got the Force back on track. He got the pace back to what it actually originally was, which is a series of different stories. Every character has their own story and they're all happening at once. I said this in my previous review, that if you look at a film like The Empire Strikes Back, you get Luke's story with Yoda, and you get Han's and Leia's story, and you get Lando Calrissian's story, and all these different stories happen at once, and then at the end they come together. And The Force Awakens completely scrapped that. It was not a Star Wars flow, it wasn't the right pace, but this movie got all of that back on track. The other thing is, the previous film 7 had a very clear black and white, good guy, bad guy, nonsense thread, and this film once again tapped into the idea that the Force is everywhere, and it is within you, and it is without you, and also the idea that evil is within you as well. There is not necessarily good and bad people. It is simply a case of you must overcome your own darkness in order to be good, which is prominent throughout this movie. It's very obviously prominent within Luke. It is prominent even with the Benicio del Toro character, who I feel is very understated, but he's a very, very interesting part of the whole film because of his approach, which is essentially, you blow them up today, they'll blow you up tomorrow, and it's going to carry on, and who's to say which one of you is actually good? And Finn says, you're wrong, and he says, maybe. And that was very interesting because that does actually go back to what the original Star Wars theme is. Who's to say who's right or wrong? It should be a more difficult question. Even Darth Vader, who is the nemesis, is still Luke's father. He's still got good within him, and Rian Johnson brought that back with this. Now, also in regards to the pace, I did feel while I was watching it like it almost has a Studio Ghibli kind of a pace, as well as having an Empire Strikes Back kind of a pace. Now, some people I've heard since watching the movie, I was shocked to discover that it had such a backlash from fans. I really had no idea. I didn't look at any reviews for days, and I was surprised. And one thing people said is, oh, it's kind of slow and boring. Now, I didn't consider it boring at any point. I did think I can imagine some people finding this boring because they're used to a J.J. Abrams pace, but this is authentic to Star Wars pacing. It's also authentic to a more slow, almost organic movie that tries to create a world, a bit like Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki. And it didn't come as a surprise that I saw an interview with Rian Johnson, who said that the little new characters who he inserted in, who I liked very much, he was asked if he was inspired by like Pokemon, and he said no. If anything, I was inspired by Miyazaki and My Neighbor Totoro. That kind of pace is a wonderful pace so far as I'm concerned, and I could feel that kind of Hayao Miyazaki Studio Ghibli influence on this film, and that's perfectly the right kind of influence. The anime take your time and tell a story properly pacing, and it's also very obvious in, I suppose, the most highly acclaimed, well-loved shot in the whole movie, which is the light speed shot, where, well, if you know it, you know it, but that shot is incredibly anime. It's totally 1980s style Japanese manga, and Rian Johnson clearly knows that stuff. Like I said, you just have to look at his use of a camera. He knows how to make things look good. There are even moments where, like in episode 7, the death of Han, I hated that death scene. I hated that shot where Han falls down the chute, because I felt like it looks like the same thing that Luke fell down in Empire and Luke survived. So I thought, it doesn't even look like he died. It's really a very, very bad way to kill off a character visually. And then Rian Johnson did a death scene in this with Phasma, where Phasma falls through the floor opens up, and then fire comes up to consume Phasma. And I almost felt like Rian Johnson was sort of saying to JJ, see, that's how you do it. If you want a character to fall to its death, you do it like this. And it looked incredible. It looked so much better than the way Han fell off that bridge. It's almost like a one dancer watching another dancer do a special move or a special dance, and then the second dancer gets up on stage and goes, all right, let me show you how it's done. Let me show you how it's supposed to look. And if you compare Phasma with Han, it is like, okay, that's how it should have looked if he's going to fall to his death, because it just looked immeasurably superior. So the pacing and the visuals and all of that in this film, I really felt like it was tremendous. Now, the film had no evil characters, which I liked very much as well. Every single character has a reason and a purpose to do what they are doing. And even down to Luke. Now, I particularly actually liked Luke's turning point. I felt like it asked the question, maybe too much power is a bad thing. Too much ability with the Force is a bad thing, because obviously in the story, now don't get me wrong, I wasn't sitting there saying this was a perfect story, but I was able to go with it because I felt like a young Luke Skywalker with no real ability in the Force and no training would look at somebody like Kylo Ren and be quite naive and childlike and good and sweet and kind, and just think, I believe in him, I believe there is good in him, I believe there is good in everyone, and he would never pull out his lightsaber and think about killing him. But because in the story Luke is so powerful with the Force by this point that he actually has the foresight to see where the young Kylo Ren, where his future lies, he can see this negativity and this darkness and the chaos that will reign as a result of this kid growing up and being able to pursue a dark path, that Luke is terrified of it, and he pulls out his lightsaber in a regrettable moment and considers killing him. And again, it asks a bigger question, which is, obviously a young Luke without power would be not faced with this kind of question or this opportunity. Do you strike at the heart of evil before it has a chance to grow? Because he'd be too naive to see that potential evil. So instead it's essentially the with great power comes great responsibility question. Maybe Luke was too good and too advanced, and it's like the more intelligent you get, you start to have the weight of the world on your shoulders. The older and more mature anybody gets, the more they start to see that things are not necessarily as beautiful as they had once believed. They don't have the kind of optimism that they once had. Everybody likes the idea that Luke was once the single spark of hope in the universe, and he was always optimistic and always positive. But, you know, many years are supposedly passed since that Return of the Jedi, and Luke has had to grow up and live and learn, and I like the fact that Rian Johnson didn't just say, yeah, you know, Luke's still the young buck, the life of the party. It's like, no, let's be honest about this. The more wise a person gets, the more darkness they take into their life. This even goes back to things like the Adam and Eve story. When Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, well, what is the knowledge? The knowledge is that there is darkness. The knowledge is that they are going to grow old and they are not going to live forever, and that they are going to die. Some people look at those stories literally, but I look at it metaphorically, which I believe is how it's supposed to be looked at. But the metaphor of, say, Adam and Eve is the more knowledge you get, the harder it becomes, because those two characters didn't even know that they were ever going to die, you know. And I feel like the Adam and Eve metaphor is the idea of being young and youthful, and you think the world is a Garden of Eden and it's paradise, and your parents look after you and do everything for you. And then the older and more mature you get, you realize, oh, I'm not going to live forever. I'm going to have to work. I'm going to face hardships. Things are going to get difficult. And you take all of this on, and it becomes your responsibility the older you get. And that's what I felt like Rian was doing in a subtle way, but in a logical way, with the character of Luke, which is the older he got, the more darkness he has to face up to and the more responsibility he has, and he's still not infallible. He's still liable to make mistakes. And then, of course, the very beautiful scene where Yoda appears. Again, loved this. Loved the fact that he was a puppet. None of the CGI bullshit. It sounded just like Frank Oz. I think it is Frank Oz. It was like real Star Wars, real Yoda, real dialogue, you know, a nice, beautiful moment where Yoda's saying it is the curse of the master that our students will develop beyond us. They will supersede us. And I loved that. I was like, this feels like Star Wars. Again, it has actual depth. It asks actual questions. It is a human story, even if this is a galaxy far, far away and these people are not necessarily even human. Now, there was humor in the movie. I wasn't crazy about the humor. The script, I'm not saying this is perfect. Like I said, Rian Johnson, I felt like he had an incredibly difficult job on his hands, but I felt like he did the best pretty much that he could have done with what he was given. Now, no, it's not a perfect film, and the script could have been better. This is not as good a script as Lee Brackett's Empire Strikes Back script, but it's good enough. I would have removed much of the humor in it, but I still feel like there's enough integrity, such as the Yoda sequence, such as the scene when Kylo says to Rey, you're nobody, your parents are nothing, you don't even have a place in this story. Again, this felt a little bit like Rian Johnson saying, she doesn't have a place in the story. I don't even necessarily like the way she was introduced in the last film, but the dialogue had weight because he says, you're nobody, but not to me.